Hi. I'm Devon. I'm the product manager of the open source economy team at GitHub. And we were really excited to share today the new GitHub Sponsors product that our team has been building. As I mentioned, this is a first step, but in a way, it's actually sort of the continuation of a longer journey that we've been on. Since last year, I've been working as a researcher, actually, before I was a product manager, doing research into open source communities and understanding what makes them really strong and able to succeed in the future. And one of the key pieces that fell into place there was funding, which is why we built sponsors. But today, I'm really excited to share a little bit more of that research and some of the other things that I learned from talking to open source communities all around the world, all sorts of different programming languages and frameworks. And something that I noticed when talking to all of these communities and maintainers was that many of them face a lot of the same challenges and have similar needs. And a lot of them have come up with different really clever solutions, but they haven't necessarily talked to each other very much. The Java programmers don't really talk to the JavaScript programmers. The Haskell programmers don't really talk too much to the Objective-C people. And it's pretty interesting to see all of the different tricks and different strategies that they've taken up. And I think that it's really useful to be able to share those. So today, we'll go through 3 things that I thought were particularly impactful and that have been influencing us as we built out GitHub Sponsors and will continue to influence us as we grow out the program beyond. So in the months before we started building GitHub Sponsors, I interviewed hundreds of developers and was really inspired by a lot of the approaches they were taking. This is actually one of my favorite parts of the job. I love talking to people about things that they're passionate about and really understanding what makes their projects tick. And I get to compare the notes of the challenges and techniques and different systems that people have put in place. So I sort of went on a little journey through the lands of open source and tried to put together a map, which I think I'll continue to add to in the future. And these are just some of the communities that I spoke to. I feel like I traveled far and wide, and now I'm kind of bringing back my favorite customs from each of these places. It's sort of how I travel in the real world, too. I like coming back from different parts of the world and incorporating the best pieces into my own lifestyle and sort of remixing it and making it my own. So hopefully you guys can do this in your own open source communities and other projects that you work on. So the question today is basically, which parts of this have we learned from and integrated into the development of GitHub Sponsors too? And I'll get into a little bit of detail there. So one thing that I've seen that I really found inspiring was this project called All Contributors. You may have noticed that some of the same themes came up in the keynote. And what All Contributors does is it basically says there are a lot of different contributions that you can make to an open source project that aren't just pushing code. And all of these have to happen for a project to be successful. And what it does is they've created this little bot that basically makes it possible for you to comment on a pull request or an issue saying, hey, add Anna as a documenter or someone who is a designer for our project. And that'll open a pull request in the README, which adds these little emojis. And I think that the emoji key is extremely cool. I guess, so yeah, here's an example of adding the comments with the pull request, and here's the emoji key of all of the different things that you can add people for. And I assume they're accepting pull requests too if you see anything missing on this list. I've seen this take root the most in NPM communities, like Node communities, specifically within the React world. But I think that this is something that open source projects of all types can benefit from. And something I've heard repeatedly from a lot of maintainers is that as a project scales in particular, the work actually changes from being something that's about writing code every day to a lot of the management and motivating people and understanding sort of what the long-term strategy is, talking to corporate users, talking to beginner developers who have never used open source before who don't really know what forking is, like what's the difference between forking and cloning a repository. So these are challenges that you don't necessarily get prepared for when you first become a developer, and you're certainly not very much recognized for it in a lot of cases. So I think All Contributors has a really cool idea here, and it's something we've built into sponsors by saying that GitHub Sponsors is for all contributions to open source, not just people who build code artifacts, which of course is super important, but not the only thing. Another place that I've personally drawn a lot of inspiration that is influencing how we're thinking about GitHub sponsors and the other tools that we're building for maintainers is this open source company called Rasa. They're what's called Open Core. So they have this the core of open source software that is you can open pull requests on, you can see all the code, and then they offer services on top of that. I actually think some of them might be in the audience today because they're based in Berlin, and I invited them. So welcome to Kraftwerk. Something that they've done that I think is really, really cool is that they have something called a contributor sheet, and they made a copy for me and I filled it with fake data, so don't go emailing any of the people in here because they're not real. But they have this contributor sheet for keeping track of all of the different people who participate in their open source projects. Again, this is sort of tied in with the first concept, saying there's all of these contributions that don't necessarily get tracked directly in GitHub right now. And yet we really want to make sure that they're respected and included as part of the project and thanked for their wonderful contributions. So they have this, what's basically a CRM inside of Google Sheets, where they keep track of all of these people and make sure that, if they haven't been reached out to for a while or they haven't made a contribution in a while, that they aren't stuck on something, or that if someone has been really active adding documentation, that they get recognition for that. I think this, as soon as they showed this to me, I got coffee with one of the co-founders, and he pulled it up, and I was like, wow, that is awesome. I would love to see every open source project have something like this, because at the end of the day, open source is about the process of collaborating with all of the different people involved. And I don't know about you, but I have a really hard time remembering people's names and a really hard time remembering a lot of different details, even though they really matter. I think this is doubly hard in a world where we work so remotely. Nat mentioned in the keynote that if you're doing open source, you're already on a remote team, whether you intended it or not. And something that I find sort of difficult is when I meet someone that I've been working with remotely for the first time. For some reason, there's just something about your brain that isn't really designed to remember just avatars that you've seen on the screen. So I think having some sort of CRM here is really, really useful, although maybe we can come up with a little more fun of a word than CRM. So a third project that I've drawn a huge amount of inspiration from, and I think is a real model for what a lot of other communities can do, is something called Closurists Together. The way that Closurists Together works is it gathers funding from all around the Clojure community, and then it distributes those funds according to how the funders think that it should be best allocated. And there's this guy named Daniel, who's a good friend of mine, who at the end of the day makes all of those final funding decisions. And the story that he told me of how he started Closurists Together and started this team that helps put all this stuff together is that he was talking to a lot of different people in the Clojure community, and they were all sort of complaining is maybe not the right word, concerned about the state of certain projects that were really crucial, but were maybe not so much fun to maintain. Or just took a lot of work, or the person who had been maintaining it had to take some time off. And at the end of the day, if you could be making a full-time salary doing something, it's really hard to justify to your friends and family why you're just doing all of this volunteer work. So what Daniel decided to do was he said, okay, we all have these shared needs. We would all benefit if we were able to come together and fund these developers to work on these projects. And but he said also, I don't know everything. I'm not omniscient when it comes to the Clojure community. So what he does is each quarter he sends out a survey to all of the people who donate to Closurists Together, and he collates those responses and writes reports, and then explains based off of those why he made the funding decisions that he did. And I may have a few of the operational details wrong here, but right now I think the way it works is that each quarter they fund 3 projects with several $1,000s so that people a month, so that people can work on it either part-time or full-time, depending on what they want to do. And this is, I've heard from several Clojure developers that they've seen noticeable improvements in the projects that Clojure Together has funded. I think this is a really cool model because it brings the best of the community together, and it takes this holistic view over the entire set of options that could be funded, and says, we're going to decide on this and cooperate together and collaborate together on making sure that our key infrastructure is funded. So I think Clojure Together is an awesome model. There's also Ruby Together, which I think was part of the inspiration for this, though they're slightly different models. And there are some other programming communities that are starting to do these things too. But I think it would be great if every programming community, large and small, had something like Clojure Together. And I think it doesn't have to be related to the programming languages necessarily. You could say all front-end frameworks. We all have similar goals. We want to build front-end software. How about we all come together and make sure that we all have the tools that we need? Similarly, maybe you want to increase the diversity in open source. I think you could have groups of people coming together and funding those goals all together as well. So I thought this model was wonderful, and I'm really excited to see more people experimenting with things like that. So over the course of my research, one of the things that really stood out to me was that open source motivation, the developer's motivation, is so crucial to the success of these projects, which sometimes can be a little frightening because these projects are so core to all of the software that we build, and yet if one person gets a mean comment on an issue, that could tank their motivation and cause them to not want to spend time on it anymore. And totally fairly, too. These people many of you in the audience are donating your time, volunteering. And so all it takes is just a little negativity to potentially reduce motivation. So at GitHub, one of the things we've been thinking about is how to make that motivation stay more positive. And it's a pretty simple framework. There's sort of benefits and there's costs, right? On the benefit side, you get to build awesome software with people you respect, solving problems that you find interesting. Some people get paid to do open source. Some people have a specific problem they're trying to solve. Those are the benefits. On the cost side, there are things like takes a lot of time to work on open source. Sometimes you're stuck triaging issues on a Friday night. Again, I mentioned abusive comments are a serious issue in open source and on the internet in general. And so at GitHub, what we want to do is we want to increase the benefits and reduce the costs of working on open source, again, for all types of contributions. And one of the things that's one of the main frameworks we've been thinking about as we launch some of the new products today and into the future. So for instance, today we announced that there's a new permissioning system. Before, there was just the read, write, and admin. And we added a little bit more granularity there to reduce the burdens on maintainers. Because right now, up till today, maintainers were sort of stuck making the choice between whether to trust someone a lot or to completely exclude them from a project. And those are two extremes. You don't necessarily want to give someone full commit access. But you also don't want to say, now you can't contribute unless I fully trust you. There's now ability for middle ground for triagers who can assign issues, they can add labels to issues, and take off some of the burden of the maintainers without having to create more concerns for the maintainers because they have such access. Similarly, the new maintain role makes it possible for the admins of a project to bring on more people to take on key administrative functions without necessarily giving them the full keys to the kingdom. So that's something I'm very excited about on the cost side, that we're going to reduce some of the costs on open source developers. And then, of course, there's GitHub sponsors, which is the first step in increasing the benefits for maintainers as well. I think this is something I'm personally clearly extremely excited about because this is something that's going to unlock the potential of a lot more people to contribute full-time or part-time or just a little bit of extra time to open source. Right now, open source is mostly limited to people who can spend a lot of free time contributing, and that is absolutely wonderful, and those people are a core part of the open source community. But there are a lot of people who would like to work on open source more who can't really do that right now. So I'm really excited to see how people use GitHub sponsors. As I mentioned in the keynote, we're really looking for feedback, and a lot of the research, including some of the stuff I showed today, is what we're taking into account as we build out the future of the product too. So if any of that stuff particularly resonated with you, please let me know. I would love to hear it. So for the rest of my session, I'm going to open up the floor for questions. There's a microphone over there. And if you have questions about GitHub sponsors or really anything about the open source ecosystem and success, I would love to talk about it. So you guys can line up with questions. I'll give you guys some seconds, but cool. And when you come up, please introduce yourself and where you come from and why you're here.
Hi, I'm Tierney Sarin. I'm a developer advocate at Microsoft. And I came here because there's a massive collection of JavaScript people coming in the next few weeks to various events, and this was very timely to kind of understand more of what's shipping and the nice things that are happening in GitHub, and also kind of engaging with the JavaScript community. So one of the things, in JavaScript, there's a lot of code, right? A lot of modules. I think we're about to hit 1 million packages in NPM. Most of that code is developed on GitHub, and that code is often consumed by large companies. How do you see larger companies being able to use something like GitHub, the new funding features that were launched today, to be able to kind of help give back at the larger scale?
That's a great question. So I think that is absolutely key. It's something we're thinking about really hard. And you see when you go to conferences are generally sponsored by big companies, and big companies are looking for ways to support open source that are really effective. And I think right now there's an increasing number of options available to them, but there aren't enough. And in the long term, I think that GitHub will. We're talking to some people, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Because as you pointed out, that is where the money is.
Hi, my name is Dominic Tarr. I work on a project called Secure Scuttlebutt, and I got invited to attend this conference because of my part in a recent drama where I gave away a little module called Event Stream that some of you obviously remember. Anyway, I noticed on your first slide that you're from the open source economy, and I just have a question that I've been wondering. How many anthropologists does GitHub have on the payroll?
That is a great question. So I don't know if we have anyone with the title anthropologist, but in school I studied computer science as my main degree, but I also studied urban planning, anthropology, and economics, and I kind of nerd out on that stuff in my free time. And honestly, I think that was sort of the key framing that I brought into my research. Someone who I think is here today is also Nadia Egbal. She's a good friend of mine and someone who's inspired me a lot. And I've always really appreciated her perspective on these things. So to answer your question directly, I don't know if there's any who are specifically hired as anthropologists, but I think GitHub is a very human company and really focused on the people. And even increasingly so, we're very much focused on the social dynamics and making sure that these communities are strong, as opposed to just focusing on the code artifacts. Because it really is all about how people relate to each other. Open source is a process. Open source is not just the code.
Yes, definitely. But anthropology is the field where they are the experts in all those things.
Right.
So you should have tens of them.
Or hundreds.
Yeah.
Nat, get over here. We got some hiring to do. I need some headcount. Thanks. I strongly agree.
Hi, I'm Salar. I'm software engineer. So I have a question about social side of open source. So let's say you're an engineer, you find a cool idea, you go build it, and then you put it up on Twitter, but you got like 10 followers and nobody really cares about you. Unless you know someone who knows someone who retweets you, you don't see any kind of big change or spike in the usage of your software, or nobody sees it. So does GitHub have a plan for future social interactions or a discovery of packages except the search box? Because the search box, as you know, like it's a bit more difficult to use. It's not social. There's no place that you can just like marketplace, put it up, say, hey, I made this cool thing, regardless if I'm famous on Twitter or not, and like I have a lot of likes and retweets or not, people will use it. Because that's a huge demotivator. When you spend like weeks on something, you put it up, unless a famous guy retweets it, nobody will see it. Thanks.
That's a good question. So there's two parts to the answer. One is that we're very much focused on surfacing people's work right now. There's some cool things in the works that I probably am not allowed to share because it's not my team, but I think you'll be really excited about some of the things we're working on. And again, I guess I'm hammering this point home again and again, but it really is about the people and helping people express themselves. So a direction I think GitHub will be going in is focusing on bringing those people up, surfacing their awesome work, and discovery as a piece of that. The second part of the question is about GitHub sponsors. One of the things I'm really proud of about GitHub sponsors is it's integrated very natively into the workflow. And so as you pointed out right now, you weren't talking about the funding side so much, but in the context of funding, I think something you see is that there are some people who are very successful receiving money, and that's wonderful, and they're extremely great developers, but some people don't want to have a really active Twitter account. Some people don't really want to promote themselves at all. They just want to write code, or they just want to, work on their project and not really do any of that stuff. That's great too. And some of the best developers I know are like that. And so by putting it inside of the workflow, my hope and expectation is that it'll sort of bring those people up. Like right now, open source looks like a little bit of a power law, where there are a few people who are just kicking butt, and that's great. But then there are a bunch of other people who are making awesome contributions too, who don't necessarily get the visibility that they deserve. I think that with GitHub sponsors being integrated in people's workflows, it'll sort of flatten the curve out a little bit. It'll never be, perfectly even, but I think it will bring those people up and surface those awesome developers. If you have any more ideas about that, I would love to hear them, because it's something I care a lot about. There's all these people who do awesome work, but just don't really get any recognition for it.
Hi, Mark Garcia from the Python PyData community, working mainly in Pandas. My question is regarding how the users, or the users of GitHub maintainers in this case, interact with GitHub. Like for Pandas, for example, when our users have a request, have a bug or something, they just feel a GitHub issue, and GitHub is making our life very easy on managing those interactions. But when we have requests for GitHub, in my case, I was extremely interested on like assigning issues to anyone, arbitrary contributors, not only maintainers. That it's something that GitHub doesn't provide. Mm-hmm. I was trying to communicate that with GitHub. I could contact support on that. I saw some tickets in unrelated repositories on GitHub where people were reacting with emojis, like hundreds of emoji reactions. People were really interested on those features too. But I couldn't see like how we can interact on GitHub in a more like useful way than just sending an email to support.
Yeah, totally. Again, two answers. So number one, email me. My email is devonzuegel@github.com, spelled very weirdly. Oh man, I guess I have to spell it now. DEVONZUEGEL@github.com. You can just take my name. It's all over the place. It's that. So we want to hear from you. The other piece is for open source maintainers. There's a community called the Maintainers. It's an organization in GitHub where people can open issues and have conversations. And one purpose of it is to give GitHub feedback and to tell us about that stuff. And the other thing is to bring the maintainers together to share stories with one another and tips and tricks and things like that. So you might, I'm not sure if you're in, I don't think you're in it yet. I haven't seen you at least in it. We'd love to include you in that and anyone else. Again, email me for that. I'll send more pointers. And I've personally found the group really motivating to also to follow. It's a source of a lot of inspiration and energy for me. There's a few conversations in that a week usually, and there have been a bunch of times where I get kind of like tired at the end of the week, and then I open an email that gives me the notifications, and it gives me a lot of inspiration to keep going. So I think you'd like it too, and that's a good start. So
Thank you.
thanks.
Hey, I'm Felipe Silva from closer, okay, from the Angular team, and I think you kind of answered what I was asking, was I was going to ask, which is, as maintainers and project maintainers, there's this whole thing that people just go through when, they get kind of depressed, they're addressing these issues, etc. And each project and each individual maintainer ends up addressing them kind of their own way. You mentioned that you saw these patterns, and I wanted to ask, if you saw these patterns, what efforts are being made to make these patterns more clear to the people that are involved? You mentioned this maintainer community. I heard about it once, maybe a year ago, but never again. And now you mentioned it again. How do maintainers actually get together and share their experiences and share their patterns for dealing with this?
Yeah, I think, is this still on? Can you guys still, oh, there we go. Where was I going? So I think the maintainers org is something that we want to expand, and I think we could do a better job of making this more public. So that's a point taken. And I guess maybe we can write more about it. That might help people find it. There's also a number of conferences that I've been to that have been really, really helpful. I like to be sort of a fly on the wall, sort of more following along. But there's Sustain OSS, which is something that Open Collective puts on. That's a really motivating conference for me. That's obviously more focused on the funding side, but also other things, talking about how to keep open source sustainable in general, not just about money. There's also a conference called The Maintainers that is happening in October, I believe, in Washington, D.C., and it actually brings maintainers of all sorts, not just open source software. There are people who maintain sewage plants and train tracks and things like that, people who maintain all sorts of infrastructure, including digital infrastructure. And I'm really looking forward to that one. As I mentioned, I actually studied anthropology and urban planning and things like that in school. So it's a really cool mix of those two things. So I could send you more resources too. I could probably list a bunch more places. But also would love to hear what you think, what you would want. Because GitHub, I think, is in this unique position where we serve all of these different communities. And we can sort of create that space for people to come together and then sort of hand it off. So if that's something you're interested in, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Lorenzo. I'm one of the React Native maintainers and also in the community of the maintainers. So we spoke a couple times there. Congratulations on sponsors, it's great.
Nice to meet you in 3D.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's weird.
It's really weird.
So my question, which sort of goes back to what was mentioned earlier about the anthropology aspect, is that it seems to me that when the community grows, most of the issues that you also surfaced are around basically product management and handling people. And I was wondering if at GitHub you're considering exploring options of having more advanced tools for that CMS kind of Google Sheet table or that kind of elements.
Yeah, so I want to do it. I can't tell you exactly what our plans are because it's not just my decision to make. But I think it's a really cool tool, and we're exploring that. One thing sort of that's halfway between where GitHub Sponsors is now and that CRM is ability to be able to manage the sponsors a little bit better. So I know that's not exactly what you're asking about, but making it so that you can stay in contact with the community and so on. That's probably in the shorter term, as in it'll roll out over the course of this summer. But yeah, I think like GitHub is sort of the water cooler of open source, right? It's where you come together, and I think we can work on that even more. It's sort of naturally become that, but now that we realize that that's the place where this is happening, it's on us to build the tools that make that actually possible. So I'm now starting to sound like a broken record, but please reach out to me with ideas because I'm really, really interested in building that.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sebastian Stribig. I'm from a startup, and first, because I was also part of open source community, thank you for GitHub sponsors. Thank you for that. It's a super great idea because we're all struggling sometimes with money, but also sometimes with services. And by this, our startups provide static code analysis services. So I wanted to ask how you think about, because we're a startup, the resources, they cost money. So would GitHub also not only double the money, but also double the server time, that we can provide more resources to the open source community?
Are you referring to like GitHub Actions or anything in particular?
We provide on MyGamma.io static code analysis for open source for free.
Oh, you're saying that.
Yeah.
Wait, can you reiterate the question? I may have misunderstood what you were saying.
So you double the money for GitHub sponsors. You double this money. Mm-hmm. So we provide free services for the open source community. So would you double the server resources also?
That we give to your startup?
Essentially, yes.
But we could consider it. Yeah. I don't know if I can take a strategic decision on stage, but it sounds interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll send you an email.
Send me an email. Same email as everyone else, yeah.
Okay.
Actually, and more generally, if you guys have, I'm happy to respond to all the emails, but an easier one to remember than my weirdly spelled name is also opensource@github.com. I also man that inbox, so that's effectively emailing me, but emailing me personally is probably even better. So I think we're almost out of time, but does anybody have one last question that they'd like to ask before I run off stage? Great. Thank you guys all for being here. Really looking forward to hearing from everyone who just asked me questions and also from anyone else who has thoughts or comments or feedback. This, again, GitHub sponsors is just the start of all this stuff, and we want to be building even more tools for you. So please let us know what those should be so that we know how to prioritize. Thanks so much.